I think the really unique value of OT is in the doing of a thing, that we're not just, oh, you should go do water aerobics, right? I'm going to quite literally walk with you on the path of doing water aerobics. I actually had a patient yesterday who said that they really appreciated the discrete steps and action items that come out of our sessions, and that we work together to create the plan. And I'm not just, okay, go do X, Y, or Z and come back in a week. And I think that really highlights the difference in OT, that we are there in that moment. And I'm not just giving you a directive and sending you on your way to figure out the how of it by yourself. One of my favorite statistics is that 96% of medical schools in Northern America have zero pain neuroscience education. I use that statistic to empower other providers and patients and let them know your provider cares about you, and they know so many good and important things, but they don't know about pain science. And so now that you've received some of this education, you get to be the expert in the room, and you get to be a little bit more empowered and advocating for yourself in your care to say, well, here's what I understand, and maybe here's what I need from you.
Welcome to the Brett Bennis Podcast, where I bring together a variety of experts in the field of helping you live a happier, healthier, and more fulfilling life. With us today is Katy Owens. She's an occupational therapist, pain management expert, and international public speaker. She is an advocate for holistic rehabilitation and emotional wellness, and she brings a trauma-informed approach to all of her clients. Let's go. So let's get started. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do in your practice?
Yeah, so my name's Katy Owens, and I own a private practice that focuses on pain rehabilitation, mental health, and sleep. So I work currently primarily with adults who live with chronic pain and chronic illness. And the focus of my practice is getting people back to meaningful living. It's really common for individuals living with chronic pain and chronic illness to experience a lot of what we would call occupational deprivation, where they're not able to engage in their life to the fullest extent. And so on a grand scale, my job is to get people back into doing all of the things that they want or need to do, or the things that are important to them. I do telehealth. I really wanted to include that in my practice. Having lived in rural areas of the country and knowing that sometimes access to medical care is less than stellar, wanting to make my services as accessible as possible. And then the other way I see patients is in their homes and in the community. So I find that it's really effective and impactful to meet patients quite literally where they are. So in their home, we can look at the home environment, see if there's ways to optimize that for improved occupational performance. Working with family members, do their family members understand what they're going through? Or I really love to get people moving in a way that's meaningful and sustainable to them. So an example I always give is if you wanted to get into water aerobics, but you've never been to your local rec center, and there's a lot of feelings around going to the rec center and how do you pay admission and the bathing suit and the locker rooms, we will go to the community center. We will walk through that entire process in order to make sure that it's successful in the moment and then sustainable for you long term. My overall goal working with patients is to work myself out of a job, right? I want to give people the tools to manage their pain or their chronic illness and manage it for the rest of their lives and be able to build that toolbox and become resilient when things don't go great in the future, because the nature of most chronic pain conditions and most chronic illnesses is that it's going to be cyclical. You're going to have times in your life when things are going really well. You're going to have time when things aren't going so well. So how can we build that toolbox in order to manage all of those changes and that whole spectrum of your condition?
So is this primarily with people who, for example, are coming out of a surgery, or is it other types of people that you might work with? Who might you be working with in your practice?
Yes. So I can work with all sorts of people. There's a lot of benefit in working with various kinds of population. There's also a lot of really good evidence that supports pre-education if somebody's going in for a knee replacement, a spine fusion, some kind of surgery in order to manage that pain condition, where we can still do some what we would call pain neuroscience education to help that individual understand how their body and their brain are working together to create that pain experience and manage their expectations of surgery and what to expect after surgery. So absolutely work with post-surgical individuals, or I'd love to work with more pre-surgical individuals. But I also work with individuals who have long-standing pain conditions. I think those are the people who end up finding me because they've tried everything, and they usually don't know that occupational therapy can specialize in pain rehabilitation. So I see people who maybe have done physical therapy, or they have done even other mental health therapies, and they sort of find me as somebody who can be much more functional. So individuals who might be on the border of something called a functional neurological diagnosis, and people who might have complex regional pain syndrome, which is a condition that sometimes can be caused by an injury or a surgery. I also can see individuals who are neurodivergent. So I work with a fair amount of autistic or ADHDers because neurodivergence often predisposes individuals to longstanding chronic pain conditions. So it's a pretty wide spectrum, which definitely makes my job interesting and challenging in a really fun way that keeps me active and interested in the topic, because I can really work with anybody, the person who just came out of a knee replacement to that individual who's lived with chronic pain and chronic illness for 20 plus years.
So it sounds like you take someone, and really anyone who's dealing with a level of inhibiting pain, or just what they're dealing with, chronic illness, or just something that's holding them back, and you help them essentially kind of optimize their life and figure out what their resources are in order to function better.
Yeah, great summary.
So what got you into this type of work?
Yeah, so I have sort of a long and varied work and life history. I started my life as a Starbucks barista and worked my way through various food service, retail management jobs. Ended up 30 years old, and kind of had that moment where I feel like I have more to offer the world. In that time, I was also doing a lot of volunteering with therapeutic horseback riding facilities. And that's actually how I first was introduced to occupational therapy. A lot of the OT world is like, that's a really, it's a kind of a unique way to be introduced to OT. So I knew it existed. I was really involved in the horseback riding community. Wanted maybe to go back to school, but that's expensive. And so I logically decided to just join the military instead, at 30 years old, partly as a way to facilitate continuing education or higher education. And also because I just felt that I was really stuck, and the job market is always tough, but it can be really hard when you have essentially specialized in something like I had, retail and food service management. It can be really hard to sort of launch out of that into a whole new career. But I figured the Coast Guard would be a platform to do that. And I was really attracted to really the humanitarian efforts of the Coast Guard, that it was potentially, depending on where you were stationed, that it was search and rescue focused, that it was focused on largely helping people. So I went and did that, and unfortunately sustained an injury during a training exercise. And so re-entered my own stage of rehabilitation, PT, OT, getting back to my own baseline. And that was the moment when I sort of looked back at, the therapeutic horseback riding, and I had also been really big into martial arts, and I used to run half marathons and just used to be a really super active human who had always been really fascinated and interested in how the body functions. And I think I made a Facebook post. I should be a PT or an OT, but I don't know which yet. And I had a friend from my undergrad, my theater degree undergrad, who reached out and said, I need to call you immediately. And she did. And so she basically talked me into, you need to go to OT school, not PT school, because I love my PT colleagues, but OT has such a broad scope. I always say now there's an OT for everything. We can specialize in so many different aspects of care from birth to death. We can do anything. And so she pretty well sold me on that idea. So while I was still in the military, I started looking at programs and realized that CSUOT would allow me to complete 5 prerequisites through sort of an online post-baccalaureate pre-health pathway that was really sustainable because my theater degree from 2008 wasn't really giving the credits that I needed to for a lot of other programs. So long story short, ended up at Colorado State University in their OT program. Loved the program, really appreciate the focus on holistic treatment. And they focus a lot on creative problem solving, less here's an individual who had a right CVA, this is their deficit, here's how you treat them. And really, and some people hated this, and I understand why, but kind of just giving us a person like, all right, this person had a right CVA, go. We're just like, what do we do? So in the course of that program, we had the opportunity to sort of specialize and do capstone projects and research papers. And that's where I was also really sort of in the midst of applying for disability through the VA and going through those exams and certifications, not quite the word I'm looking for, but sort of the evaluation of my own ability or disability. And also working through the VA healthcare system and initially having not so great care. I am so grateful for the care team I have now that is incredible and supportive and validating and everything you want a care team to be. But that really highlighted for me, first of all, the gap in services that's available to individuals living with chronic pain, and just continued to feed my curiosity about what is it to be in chronic pain. What are the options available for individuals? How can we improve function, improve quality of life, improve meaningful living? So I ended up specializing in pain science throughout grad school, sort of towards the second half, once I, delved a little bit into it. And ultimately, I also work part-time in a level 1 trauma hospital. And I love that environment too, because it's very high paced, it's very high acuity, meeting people with all kinds of diagnoses, but again, like a really intense environment, which just really continued to articulate to me that there was a huge need for pain neuroscience education to the masses, so to speak, because really in the hospital, everyone you're dealing with on a daily basis is experiencing pain in one way or another, whether it's acute, chronic, acute on chronic. And so, again, seeing that gap in services and how our patient population could be better served if there was more access and more awareness of the pain experience, how it's created, what causes pain, and how we can take control of that pain going forward.
And one of the things that really stood out to me as you're describing this is really the gap filling and the really broad perspective that an OT seems like they need to have when they're approaching a client. And that is something that I believe is incredibly important because we live in a society and we operate in a medical paradigm where we have a ton of experts operating in their individual silos, but most of them don't really either know that they should or don't have the opportunity to talk to each other very much. And what it sounds like is kind of like a PCM, primary care manager. You need to be aware of kind of all the different things, and you link arms with someone as they're walking through that and provide almost gap fill for where are these people not able to help someone, or where is there a gap left open in someone's life that needs to be addressed. And so you need to be both flexible, but also in tune to the path that they're on. It's a really interesting way to approach care, and I think very much needed in the way that our current care paradigm is in the West. Has that been your experience? What's been your reflection on that?
Absolutely. I find that patients who come to me have a lot of questions, and I don't always have the answer, but that's, again, part of what I love about it is that opportunity to dig in and look at the research, look at the person in front of me, hear their story, and figure out where we can connect those dots. And I think the really unique value of OT is in the doing of a thing, that we're not just, oh, you should go do water aerobics, right? Like I'm going to quite literally walk with you on the path of doing water aerobics. I actually had a patient yesterday who said, they phrased it really well. I might not get it exact, but they said that they really appreciated the discrete steps and action items that come out of our sessions and that we work together to create the plan. And I'm not just, okay, go do X, Y, or Z and come back in a week. And I think that really, really highlights, again, the difference in OT, that we are there, and especially being able to provide those in-home community and telehealth services. I am there with you in that moment, and I'm not just giving you a directive and sending you on your way to figure out the how of it by yourself. And I think that, and I agree that it's more a function of sort of being unable to walk alongside patients in that manner, that a primary care provider or other providers, they just don't have the time. And I think I also, working in the healthcare system and being a patient, have a really unique perspective where I understand where physicians and other providers are coming from, that they really do care. But like you said, they don't have the education, they don't have the awareness in order to provide that. One of my favorite statistics is that 96% of medical schools in Northern America have zero pain neuroscience education. And so I use that statistic to empower other providers and patients and let them know, like, your provider cares about you and they know so many good and important things, but they don't know about pain science. And so now that you've received some of this education, you get to be the expert in the room and you get to be a little bit more empowered and advocating for yourself in your care to say, well, here's what I understand, and maybe here's what I need from you. And other providers, other OTs, I love talking to other OTs as well, because I think we are perfect for this population. I think we have a really specific and unique skill set to address people with pain, because really the foundation of what we do is what we call like a biopsychosocial model of care. It's what CSU teaches, and it's what a lot of programs are founded in. So essentially, if we break that down, we're considering the biological aspects of our patient. So we are taking into account their medical diagnosis, medications that they're on, an injury, a surgery. We're also thinking about things like genetics or other external factors or internal factors biologically that are impacting their care. We're also looking at psychological factors. So we're considering stress, we're considering any pre-existing mental health conditions, we're considering the circumstances surrounding the onset of injury or illness, and so many more things. And then we have the social aspect of care. So we're considering friends, family, loved one. What does their community look like? And I always like to highlight that we also have to consider that individual's care team. Like you said, they might have received sort of pieces of information from their various care team providers, but how can we synthesize that? How can we collaborate? How can we communicate? And just acknowledging that the medical care team is a really impactful part of that patient's experience. So OTs, that's our bread and butter, essentially, is that biopsychosocial model. And that's why
Hmm.
I think we're so well equipped to fill in those gaps with other.
And not just the care team, but also the support team, which brings in the social part of it. Because something that I've noticed is that a lot of people will make decisions based more off of what their family and friends say, because there's that trusted relationship, than necessarily what the experts or what their professional care team might say. They might either buy in or they might not buy in, or they might pursue a certain type of care because of what their family and friends say. And so there's their care team, but then there's also their support team, and cultivating that conversation. It sounds like OT is in a really unique position to begin doing that. I had a quick question. You mentioned pain science and how it's not really discussed or taught in, I think it's what's considered allopathy medicine, where it's kind of the conventional what you might imagine when you approach the medical sphere in America or in the West. What is pain science as you understand it, and then what makes it different than what is normally taught in allopathy?
Yeah. So when I talk about like pain science or pain neuroscience education, it's really the understanding of how the brain and the body interact to create pain. So on a very high level, to sort of define that, we consider pain to be a sensory and emotional experience that resembles that or that is associated or resembles that associated with tissue damage. We also know the new science that is coming out that tissue damage does not necessarily equate to pain. There's all sorts of circumstances where you can have tissue damage and no pain. You can have no tissue damage and pain. And that's when we start to get into the complexities of how the nervous system and the body interact. Most traditional medical curriculum is just not going to talk about that. They're going to talk about diseases, pathologies. They're going to be much more if X, then Y. If you have this condition, here's the treatment for that. And it's sometimes going to be still based in lifestyle modification. So diet and exercise might come into play, but really discussing that central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system and how it creates a pain experience and that it is subjective is not in most curriculums. I will say, I know that Stanford is working to combat that. They have a pretty robust presence on social media where they talk a lot about pain science and the importance of understanding that so that we can better help patients. And then what was the other question?
I think you've kind of covered it about what is pain science and then what makes that different than what's taught in traditional allopathy. So it sounds like it's basically working to bridge the gap between, you could consider psychology, physiology, and biology, and like understanding how these different things actually work together. And whereas allopathy tends to focus on biology and maybe physiology, how the systems work together, you're bringing in, there's more to that. There's everything that's involved, and something that might not register on a sensor or something, like there's no tissue damage here, you shouldn't be any pain, go home type of answer. Well, I am in pain, so what's happening? There's no tissue damage, so there's something else that's going on that you're not looking for, you're not registering or not aware of. And so what pain science does is understanding the intricacies of how those things interact and how can I still be experiencing pain even though there's no physical damage, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And I like to think of it that traditional medicine, your primary care, they're likely practicing based on a biomedical model. So biology, pathology, tissue damage, scans, lab values. And then again, that's where we set apart the biopsychosocial model. I never want to discount what is happening with somebody biologically, of course. And I would say in most cases, there was an illness, an injury, an accident, something that precipitated what becomes chronic pain. So we have to consider that, but we just need to acknowledge that it's not the entire picture. I do think that we're seeing some changes, and some of the really good doctors that I know do acknowledge that there is an entire person and it's not just your lab values and your MRI and your physical exam, that we do need to start to look beyond that. But again, unfortunately, with how the system is structured, they likely don't have the time to go into that with patients, which is the value that OT can bring to that conversation.
So is pain science a standard OT practice, or is it something more that you can specialize in as an OT?
So the answer is yes. So pain science in and of itself is definitely something that would benefit from additional education or additional certification or credentialing. That's really to start to understand. I mean, it is neuroscience essentially. So it does require usually more than the standard education. Most OT programs, I don't know of one that doesn't act this way. They prepare us to be generalists. Again, partly because the scope of OT can be so broad. So we learn a little bit about lots of different things across the OT spectrum. And then once we get into a workplace, sort of the onus is a little bit on the practitioner in order to develop those specialty skills or certifications, et cetera, needed for that setting. A lot of people know what they want to specialize in right out of grad school, and so they go right into that. Somebody like myself, some people dilly-dally for a while until they find what they're passionate about. So it is beneficial to understand that neuroscience on a deeper level if you would like to specialize in it. That being said, again, the message I like to empower other OTs with is that if you understand a biopsychosocial model, if you understand how to do things like motivational interviewing, if you look at someone holistically and are working through a plan that's based in occupation, which is all the things we want, need, and are expected to do, you have the basic tools to help somebody living with chronic pain. And I think that also I like to empower individuals in that realm because statistically, 1 in 4 people in the world live with a chronic pain condition. And the likelihood is skewed that you're going to encounter someone in pain if you're working in a clinic or a hospital or in the healthcare industry in general, right? I never like to guarantee, but I would almost guarantee you that probably 90% of the patients seen by OTPT on a daily basis are going to be experiencing a pain condition. So it's good to have that higher level education if you plan on specializing in it. And we can still meet people where they are. And if nothing else, I think I share and I encourage other OTs to just believe people. I think that we really sort of can sometimes underestimate the power that our language has as medical providers. And so it is so impactful, it is so powerful, it is so healing to simply look at a patient and just say, I believe you. You're telling me the truth because you're in your body. I am not in your body, and I don't know what you're talking about or what you're experiencing. But so many patients, our medical system is so adversarial to people with chronic pain that if you can just start with believing somebody and then offering them some of those tools that are in your toolbox, their pain will probably reduce, at least in that moment, because they're nervous.
Mm. I remember talking about something like this with my wife and how for example, in the charity sphere, something that we encountered that there's a huge emphasis on trying to weed out the bad eggs. And while I understand it, there's obviously there are people who are out there who are going to try to game the system or going to try to scam you. There's going to try to do all sorts of things. But say that's 1 in 10 people. Are you willing to hurt 9 people in order to weed out one? Or would you rather be scammed by 1 person in order to help 9?
Yeah, it is a tough predicament that the medical profession can find itself in. And that's, I think, the other reason I empower other practitioners to behave that way because I can't prescribe, right? I mean, no matter how someone is with me, I can't give them a medication. I can't give them a test or a MRI. They're not going to game me. But what I can give them is validation and understanding and tools. Again, I think that is so effective. I see on a daily basis, especially in the hospital, when I just say, I believe you, I hear you. That is enough to make people, you can just see their whole body just like relax and they're often tears, right? It can be a very emotional experience just to have somebody say, I believe you and this isn't your fault.
Yeah, especially the combination you mentioned earlier, motivational interviewing, and how the combination of both, I believe you, and I think there's a way we can
Mhm.
improve this. I think there's hope for you. Those two things together, it can turn so many people's stories from a train wreck into a hopeful, we're going to do this together. And people start, and that's something that's so important for motivation because of someone has to believe that better is possible before they even begin to consider pursuing it. So
Absolutely.
going into that, you mentioned the motivational interviewing and how do you as someone who has an outsider perspective by necessity as someone who's going through that for someone who's going through that pain and someone who's has this kind of all-inclusive experience and your goal is to bring this very broad, open, all-inclusive perspective. And I'm pushing back a little bit to understand how your approach is. How could you even begin to understand what they're going through enough to help them move forward? What do you do to do that? And how can a potential client trust that you'll be able to understand enough to help them?
Absolutely. I am pretty open about sharing my own diagnoses and struggle because I I think there's like an old meme, something to the effect of heal out loud because we almost lost you in the silence. And I think that that is really impactful. And I think that a lot of people have that experience because even though 1 in 4 people is living with a pain condition or a chronic illness, we often don't talk about it because there's a lot of shame and stigma associated with that. And so again, I'm very open, but I also never make it about me. And I also like to always qualify that I know what my pain journey has been. I know what my journey with chronic illness has been. So I would never pretend to fully understand what someone else is going for or going through, but I also can understand that it sucks. And you don't have to pretend, you don't have to be stronger than you are. Like we will together work and build something. And for me, I think it's important to always be curious. Curiosity is really at the root of OT, and I think should be at a lot of other medical professions, but asking a lot of questions and really getting to the root of what somebody hopes to build, and then together building what they want. And when I talk to prospective patients, I really upfront tell them that, I'm here and we will build together, but this is also kind of on you because I am not in your body. I don't know your experience. So you need to teach me about you. If it's a diagnosis that I'm not super familiar with, they're the expert. I mean, in general, we're all the experts on our own body. And so, again, continuing to empower people and build people up. You are the expert of your body. You are the expert of your experience. So if we can sort of work together in order to build that.
We'll get back to that conversation in just a minute. If you've been enjoying this podcast, you might be interested in some other resources we've been developing. Search benniscompanies.com and you will find books, podcasts, and other resources that we're developing to help you live a happier, healthier, and more fulfilling life. Back to it.
I think also just being vulnerable, my own self, when I don't know the answer to something and when I might have to say, I'm going to have to look into that. But again, putting it back on the other person in a really positive way and saying, well, what do you think would work? Like, what would help you? And being really open to an open dialogue and making it clear with patients, you're not going to offend me. I made something for a patient the other day and I was like, please be honest. If you hate it, if it's not going to work, please tell me, because if it doesn't work, if it's not an effective tool for you, then that's not part of it. The other thing is that a lot of the work I do ultimately is about retraining the central nervous system. I tell patients, our brains get really good at what they do really often, right? It's why you have to practice the piano every day. It's why you can't just walk out of the womb. You have to build that system and that chain of events in order for your nervous system to be able to do it. So our brains spent a long period of time, even maybe a short period of time, getting really, really good at that pain response, that feedback loop. So it's going to take time for it to learn a new way of being. The good news is our brains are very flexible and they can learn new skills, new strategies, new pathways, essentially up until we take our last breath. But that means that the patient, that they have to be doing that work on their own. I can't retrain your nervous system for you. And so we have to work together to build a plan that can become sort of a daily practice where you're putting in the work to retrain your nervous system. The good news is that there's evidence that shows that just 8 minutes at a time can retrain the nervous system. And I really like to talk about how we can fit little moments into our day that make it sustainable and can be that lifelong practice and part of that lifelong toolbox that we're building, so that we don't feel like, okay, I have to set aside an hour and now I have to retrain my brain because Katy said so. That's not what it's about, but it's really cultivating ownership of their experience. And like you said, I think that belief that things can get better is something that's missing in the biomedical model, because that really tells patients, take this pill, have this surgery, maybe do this PT, and this will fix you. And then when that doesn't work, or if that doesn't work, patients feel really discouraged. And they're like, again, I've tried everything. And it's like, well, have you tried retraining your nervous system? And so by giving people back the control and the agency over their own body, I find that that leads to some really optimistic and really incredible outcomes.
Or even when doctors may not be aware of an option, and so they have this thing of either this one thing that I know of works, or you're just sorry, you're out of luck. And that's not everyone, but there are enough of those out there that that's a common experience from what I've seen. And so having the hope, taking into account the motivational impact, taking into account whether or not someone believes that they can be healed actually does affect whether or not they will take the steps to heal, or whether or not their physiological system will start shifting and changing in a way that is facilitating of healing. I'd like to talk a little bit about you are surrounded by people who are walking this path. You have walked this path yourself. What was one of the greatest lessons that you've learned for people who are navigating this chronic pain, recovering from an injury, or working with this neurological response? What are some of the greatest lessons or themes that you've seen for those who are successful in actually improving their experience of life?
Yes, I think there's been a few. One of it's a quote from a book that I have on a sticky note on my desk, and it's even if you can't be cured, you can be healed. And I think I love that you use that word in your previous statement, because it's this idea that, okay, maybe my, the spine fusion I had is going to contribute to my experience. Maybe the RA is not going to go away. Maybe, any given diagnosis, maybe that's just going to be a part of who I am now. And I can still have a positive impact on my experience. And I think that, again, that is the crux of it, is believing and investing that time in your brain and your body to say that two things can be true at once. Like, this really sucks. Like, it is not fun to always hurt and to have your hands hurt when it rains and be tired and to miss maybe, dates with friends or important things at work. Like, all of that really, really sucks. And we can still do so many other things that make our life meaningful. I think that's the biggest flex, if you will, is being able to hold those two oppositions at the same time. And we can still make room for the suck, for the fact that this is really a big bummer. And we can still commit to conscious action. And a lot of that is a principle of acceptance and commitment therapy. It's also called ACT, which I use a lot, because that is the line that we have to ride, is this sucks, and I can still figure out a way to get to my niece's birthday party and to manage my pain when the barometric pressure shifts. Whatever it means to live meaningfully, there are still ways. Will it look different? Maybe. But I think the other huge shift for me was understanding that different isn't worse. And it's just different. But that as a society, especially if we see a decline in function, like I shared, I used to be a martial artist, super athletic, running marathons. I went to boot camp when I was 30, but I was keeping pace with all the 18-year-old boys as far as push-ups and sit-ups. I'm not a fast runner, so I wasn't up there with them. To go to somebody who, I'm definitely more active now than when I was first diagnosed. But, if I go swim for half an hour, that's probably my physical activity for the day. But just acknowledging that doesn't make me less than. That doesn't mean I'm a worse person. It doesn't mean I'm not worthy of all the good things in life. It's just a different season of life, and this is what it looks like now. And I think with that is also understanding the grief that comes with chronic pain and chronic illness, and acknowledging that there is loss. There is a different future than maybe you had imagined. That things look different. Things probably have to change to some extent. You have to take a new trajectory. And again, making space to grieve that loss. And also acknowledging that that's not a linear process and it's not a time limited process necessarily, that grief and grieving the changes might be a constant companion throughout life. But again, like how can we hold all of this at once in a way that makes us whole and isn't fragmented?
And just having that perspective of first that someone may have to grieve, and just the process of letting go of expectations that may no longer be feasible at this point. Also the knowledge that there's light on the other side of this grief, that there's something to live for even after this. And like you said, different doesn't necessarily mean worse. It just means different. And just having a sense of, just because I have this issue that I'm dealing with or this thing that happened to me doesn't mean that my life is over. There's still more to do. There's still more that I can offer to the world. There's still more joy that I can experience in this world. I remember reading a book about, there's someone who is dealing essentially with depression. It was a really powerful book. I love it. It's set in a fantasy setting, part of the Stormlight Archive series by Brandon Sanderson, who does amazing work on mental health as he writes. But he talked about how just because today is cloudy, it doesn't mean that tomorrow is going to be sunny or the next day, but there will be sunny days in the future. And just having that can give you the motivation to take the next step, even when nothing else looks like it's worth it. It sounds like that's part of what you are offering to your people who they're maybe not getting that from other people, or that from their primary care team, or from anywhere else, but maybe they are, but you are helping them accept, but also work towards a future that is going to be sunny no matter what. I love that. What about for people who, you are in a position where you're not dealing with just one person who is having a rough time. Everyone in your practice, by definition, is having a really rough time. And so you've had to learn some really important lessons, I'm sure, for how to navigate this successfully as a provider and not be taken down by it, not be taken out by it, not be dragged, not have it severely affect you. What are some of the greatest lessons that you've learned as a provider helping people navigate this that's successful for you, not just successful for them, but successful for you to be able to continue your impact in the way that you'd want?
That is a wonderful question. And I am so glad you asked it. I have two key thoughts, because burnout is really high in all medical professions. And I see a lot of posts on like new OT boards, like how do you separate yourself? How do you not just become totally emotionally drained? And so the first part of the answer, when I started my first job at a bagel shop when I was 15, my mom said to me, it's not personal. People are going to come in, they're going to be nice, they're going to be mean, they're going to be rude. They're going to be all kinds of ways. It's not about you. You did not cause that in that individual. And I think that was the best thing to hear at 15, starting a life of customer service and just really being able to internalize and then practice for 15 years. This person is upset, they're angry, they're lovely. It's really not about me. And so how has that helped? So then as I have shifted into the medical profession, that idea still holds true, that I can still hold, especially the icky things. Like when people come in and they're upset and they're angry and they're frustrated, that's probably not about me. And I know that the things that we are going to do together are going to make them feel better. So it's holding that dichotomy of, it's not about me, how they're feeling, and I have the power to help that person. The other side of the coin, and this I've learned like from my massage therapist, and then even through like I've done training with Reiki, is really sort of imagining myself as the conduit through which people can experience healing. that it is not my job to hold that for them. So I can be in a session, I can be fully present, I can deeply care about the person in front of me, and we can have an incredibly therapeutic rapport. And once that session is over, I can let that move through me and walk away from it. Do I never think about patients? No, like we're all humans, right? And the people that I work with, and because our work is ultimately so intimate, people leave an impression on me. I think I leave an impression on them. So it's allowing space again for that humanity and that humanness while also relieving yourself of the pressure and maybe the sort of feeling that you have to fix somebody. And I think that's also why I love setting the stage early on in our therapeutic relationship, that like, I am your guide. I will walk with you hand in hand. And, this ultimately is going to be on you. So I think that those two concepts have really allowed me to cultivate a really healthy engagement with my patients and obviously I have to do treatment planning and doing research. So, the people I'm working with occupy my mind in what feels like a healthy way, but I don't usually sit up at night thinking about patients. Every now and again, right? Like something might come up, and I think that that's normal, and that's part of learning those general sort of coping and mental health skills where I can hold that thought and maybe hold that affection or that care for that person and then allow it to dissipate.
It's amazing. In a way, it's practicing empathy with boundaries, understanding what is yours and what is your client's to carry, and also understanding that, like you said, you are a conduit. The healing ultimately is something that you're facilitating. It's not something that you will either make or break by being perfect that day or by handling everything absolutely perfectly. It's something that you are mostly holding space for and helping them find their way forward. How important would you say, or have you found partnering with other professionals has been in helping your clients be successful?
Oh, it's pretty integral. First of all, from a practical perspective, partner a lot with mental health professionals, so counselors or even other OTs working in mental health spaces as referral pathways. Because again, there's such an overlap, which is why I, say I specialize in pain, mental health, and sleep, because the Venn diagram of people with those issues is a stack of pancakes, right? So it's all co-occurring. So I rely on other professionals for referrals. But then I just yesterday reached out to an OT who is like a sleep guru, kind of answering a question about a patient. Like, okay, here's the HIPAA compliant situation. And I've been Googling and I'm looking through these resources, but it's a tricky population to get answers about. So I definitely rely on my colleagues heavily to fill in the gaps because I'm not perfect. And I think, again, being able to be vulnerable with a patient and say, I don't have a great answer for you right now, but let me do some digging and get back to you is really important. I rely a lot on my professional organization. So my national OT organization, I'm also part of like the International Association for the Study of Pain, where I get a lot of their research, reaching out to other people who specialize in pain. So using that network, I would love to partner more with primary care physicians. I'm working on a few different points of contact in the community currently. But first of all, I really would love to provide more information and more resources to them to let them know, like, I'm here. I can see people when you feel like you've kind of come up against a wall in what you're able to offer them. So I would love to partner more with medical doctors, nurse practitioners, PAs, to just provide them those resources and information and then cultivate more of a relationship.
So do you find that there are systems in place to help that happen? Or is it something do you think the current way of doing things and the different infrastructure and the different information systems and the different way that people are trained do you find that it actually does more to prevent collaboration and you end up having to kind of chase down those collaborative partnerships yourself?
I'm definitely doing a lot of the footwork. The folks that I have been able to connect with so far have come from Facebook connections where, especially for folks doing direct primary care models, that's where I've been able to find the most traction. I do think I kind of know that the current scheduling of physicians in a traditional medical practice, they are so overbooked, and they get so little time to see patients, and they are really limited in their capacity to be able to respond to an email or go to a networking event, et cetera. So I do think that the system in that regard is not set up very well. I don't know that it's set up very well in a lot of other regards, but that's a separate podcast. I know that a mental health therapist and I have partnered to start what we're calling like a helping professionals networking and happy hour event in Northern Colorado to intentionally bring people in the helping professionals, counselors, speech therapists, OTs, PTs, doctors together to create a community so that we can maybe, head off burnout where it begins. But then also for that practical referral aspect, I'd love to do little mini presentations or little projects or activities in the future just to give people an opportunity to be exposed to other professions and information that they're not able to access. I would really love if practices and organizations and healthcare models could make room for that within the physician's day, just because I think that again, we actually know there's a lot of evidence that supports continuing education as burnout prevention, which seems backwards, right? You would think that taking the time out of your day to engage in continuing education and collaboration would make you feel more drained, but the research shows us that that actually is the opposite. And the same thing with mentorship, that mentoring somebody or being engaged in a mentorship relationship can actually lower rates of burnout. So I would love to see that being more supported on a system level.
So where do you think that stems from? We talked about how most providers are just too busy. They're running from one thing to another. And I know that in the West, there's a fascination with an almost industrial efficiency with whatever you do, whether you're building cars or healing patients. And there's a benefit to that of being able to treat more people more quickly. But then there's also the negative side of that where people are just too busy to do anything other than the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Personally, I think one of the aspects is the requirements that insurance has on different providers to be able to meet a certain number of people per week. And I've encountered providers who essentially had to refrain from taking insurance so that they could do a better job of taking care of their clients and themselves and have a more longevity in their practice. Do you see it as an effect of those things, or is there something else that you think is also contributing to that kind of go culture and you're never able to look around or collaborate with other people?
We do know that there is a shortage of medical professionals, specifically doctors, PAs. I think PAs are a little more common, but medical doctors we don't have as many as we need to meet the needs of the growing population. So I think that is a practical barrier that is sort of made worse by insurance and the schedule and the burnout, right? So we're in like a chicken egg situation with the availability of providers because burnout is so rampant. I fully agree that insurance is a really slippery slope. I have self-pay patients, but then it was really important to me to become a credentialed provider with Medicaid because Colorado did pass a bill that mandates anybody with a condition where they may be prescribed an opioid is entitled to at least 6 sessions with OT, PT, I think acupuncture and chiropractic. I'm not 100% sure, but the intention of that bill is to minimize opioid usage. So for me, it was very intentional to become credentialed with Medicaid. I fully agree, especially for something like OT. I am able to practice to my fullest scope when I am not working within the confines of insurance. I am able to provide fully comprehensive, very tailored care to an individual if I don't have to rely on insurance giving me the thumbs up. I can still provide excellent care in the insurance system, but especially with medical doctors, and that's why I'm seeing a lot more of that direct care, direct primary care model coming out because especially medical doctors definitely, I think, can practice also to their fuller scope and then spend more time with people. Because again, I know that the providers care. They didn't go into this business because they don't care. And the statistic about the pain education, I never share that to say like, oh, physicians are useless because again, they have a really important body of knowledge. They play a really important role. So we need them and we need them to be able to practice to their fullest scope. And I think if they can find ways to get themselves more time by that directed primary care model, it's really hard for me to say. I think that buoys everybody in the healthcare system. And I think that if patients are able to receive more holistic care, more personalized care, get more than 15 minutes with their doctor at a time, I think that, again, rising tide lifts all boats, right? That not that my services will never be necessary, but people might find me quicker. And I love that idea because, again, the longer you spend in one pattern, the longer it takes to come out of it. So I would love to see systems in place that facilitate physicians having more time with their patients. And then again, more time to collaborate and network and also be buoyed by other medical professions.
So let's zoom in on that a little bit. What would a more collaborative environment look like for your industry, for your practice, for the people who work in OT? What type of systems would need to be in place to help you collaborate more with people who work in traditional allopathy, alternative, just all the different people that you might be working with in your patient's care program? What type of systems would need to be in place to help that happen?
Ooh, that's a great question. My first thought is almost like a centralized hub where anybody who is involved in a patient's care can sort of log on to that hub and we can easily send secure messages to each other and have access to pertinent information. I know that we can share health records, et cetera, currently, but there isn't a very smooth system, especially as a small private practice. It's pretty clunky for me to get access to records and talk to this person and try to get a phone call. It's really clunky. So it would be amazing to have a streamlined sort of universal hub where any size practice can have access to that. Because especially once you get into the outpatient setting, and also knowing that there's a lot of OTs opening private practices for some of those reasons we've discussed, that being able to practice outside of the scope of insurance allows us to provide even better care than we can in insurance. And again, because our current health system leaves so many gaps. So that would be amazing. I do know in my hospital system, I can usually track down the attending or the provider on call pretty quickly and have a quick chat about the patient. So I think if you're in a hospital system, you have a little bit of an easier time because of the way that that environment is structured. And then once you get into the outpatient, and again, if you're not, like if you're in the Banner Health system, right, and you're a Banner Health OT, and then that patient goes to Banner Outpatient, and then they go to Banner Home Health Care, you've got a really cohesive, streamlined pathway. But if somebody, is in the hospital at Banner, and then they go to outpatient at, this PT clinic, and then they go over here to this nutritionist, like it just becomes so segmented. And so that would be my
And the patient themselves end up being the primary go-between of, oh, my so-and-so said this, my so-and-so said that. And you don't even know, as a provider, you don't even know whether you're getting all of the information. And as a patient, how am I supposed to remember all this? I'm already dealing with the actual issue. Like, how am I supposed to do this?
Exactly. And then if you add the fact that individuals living with a chronic condition are likely to have memory impairments as a result of that condition, I don't want to say I don't believe my patients, because I do, but they're not the medical professional, right? Like you said, it shouldn't be up to them to understand the intricacies of their entire medical condition and the jargon and the da 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 da, and then relay it to each provider.
And speaking of jargon, a lot of times people from different practices, different types of care have different types of jargon. And a lot of times the client doesn't speak that jargon, but then neither does the two practitioners. So let's delve into that a little bit. How do you as an OT, probably more than a lot of other types of care, you work with people from different silos of care, different areas of care. How have you learned to interact most successfully with people who perhaps have a different methodology, different paradigm of care? And how could those lessons be implemented in setting up a collaborative system like that, where you are having someone who perhaps works in a more traditional sphere of medicine versus someone who's brought in who's more like alternative care or something like that? They speak different languages, they use different paradigms, but they're working together to help the same client. What have you learned, and how would you suggest that be set up to facilitate?
My personal philosophy is to avoid jargon and abbreviations at all cost. Even if it takes me 2 more seconds to write out the entire word, like if I'm documenting at the hospital, there's like 3 abbreviations that I'll use, even though we have approved abbreviations, because I know that I'm reading a chart and I'm like, what on earth does this mean? And then I'm Googling, and then it's like, it takes time out of the day. So my personal philosophy in dealing with most anybody, unless I know that they are also a pain specialist, is to just speak in plain English, avoid fancy terms. Or if I'm going to use a fancy term, that's the technical term. If I'm going to use something like that, I will do my best to define it or ask for understanding. I think that if you're going to do like a universal hub, we'll call it, that is a great starting point, in my opinion, is removing acronyms, removing jargon, just writing things in plain English. I also think that that can just make it easier to translate from, complementary and integrative medicine versus allopathic medicine versus OT versus PT. Like if we all just speak normal English, I think we avoid a lot of confusion.
I think that would also be really good for intellectual development as well, because when you specialize in a specific field for so long, you tend to forget that other people aren't specialized in that field and you just talk the jargon. And it's almost a foreign language for you to be able to translate into normal spoken English. So even just having that as a discipline of, I'm going to translate everything I say as if this person has no idea what I'm talking about. I think it's beneficial for the collaboration, but it's also beneficial for the development of the actual provider and for developing a greater sense of awareness, self-awareness of where my field operates in a larger sphere. My field is not the entire world. My field operates within an entire world, and I need to be aware of that. And it's something that is so obvious. It's the air we breathe that we forget it. And so even just having that discipline of translate your words can actually be really helpful. Let's go ahead.
And the patients benefit, right? Because our patients don't speak jargon. What is the average United States reading level? Like 8th grade? Most people just want plain English. So I agree that it's not just the intellectual development, but also making sure that we continue to be relatable to our patients and able to explain things in a way that's easy to understand.
That's honestly one of the best ways for me when I'm doing school and I come across a paper that is written in like very specialized jargon. I just use AI and said, hey, can you write this at a 8th grade reading level so that I can ask questions about it and all of that. And it really, for me, it helps. And you can always put jargon in parentheses and all of that. But let's look at that. Let's say that maybe we were able to put these systems in place, or let's just think about the future of your industry as an OT, your practice personally. What do you hope the future holds? What are you looking forward to as you see your industry develop, as you see your practice grow? What is it that you look to the future with hope for?
I would love to see most people get a referral to OT sooner in their medical journey. I think, again, because we can practice in so many different areas of the lifespan, that getting OT on board as early in the process as feels appropriate can be really helpful. I think that the true future of healthcare and the future of my profession is preventative healthcare. That, again, I would love to get in front of patients before they have a surgery, immediately after they break their wrist, and talk acute pain versus chronic pain. What are the predictive factors? How can we reduce the likelihood that this will progress to a chronic condition? Being able to get out in front of chronic conditions, because we also know in healthcare that those chronic conditions cost a lot more. But if we can prevent the development of those chronic conditions, not only do people live better and they live healthier lives, but it's also beneficial from an economic standpoint. Very specifically, I would love to see OT become more prevalent in the pain science world. I mentioned Stanford Medicine earlier. I am always on their Instagram posts being like, and occupational therapy. Like, they did a post about the 4 Ps of pain management. And it was like, I can't remember all of them, but I know that OT wasn't mentioned because it doesn't start with P. And so there I am in the comments. I'm sure they're sick of me at this point, but I just would like it to be as much the default as physical therapy in the pain science space, again, because of the holistic vision that we offer. There's a lot of discourse in the OT community where people like, oh, nobody knows what OT is. And my response is like, well, I don't know every profession in the world either. So I don't think that we should have an expectation that everybody knows the value of OT, that we could be more proactive, again, in how we educate the community and our partners in healthcare on the value of OT and why we should get that referral sooner in the process.
And that's actually something that you are going to be working on soon, setting up your own channel to start building that awareness, it sounds like.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of the quotes
Mhm.
by Thomas Edison that says, "The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will instruct his patients in the care of the human frame, in diet, in the cure, and the prevention of disease." Sounds like that's something that's very much in line with your philosophy and hope. And you and I both know that there is a place for like drastic interventions. There's a place for medicine. There's a place for all of those things. But then the hope is to get to a point where that's the exception, where most people are doing preventative, and so they don't have need for that. And then the doctors who engage in that sort of thing are more focused on the clients who they need something more than preventative care.
Yes.
So do you have any specific resources that you typically use with a lot of your clients? Any books, any thoughts, any steps that you would have someone take? What is it that you've found out of all of your different clients? What are some repeating themes, repeating resources, repeating pieces of advice that you offer them?
Yes. So I always talk about the 3 pillars of pain management. So that's the foundation of all of my treatment, of how I work with patients. And those 3 pillars are that we have to get you moving in a way that is meaningful and sustainable. We have to calm down your nervous system, and we have to change your thoughts and beliefs about pain. That's it. Just those 3 things, right? Easy. Understanding that each of those pillars in and of itself is a mountain of work that has to be done, but that's the foundation. I really love the Pain Management Workbook by Dr. Rachel Zofniss. It is $20, and for people who maybe don't have access to an OT or to pain science, it's a really economical resource. It's grounded in cognitive behavioral therapy for pain science and is really parallel to what I'm doing. I also love a podcast, my fellow millennials. It's talk radio for millennials, as I call it. the Ologies Podcast. So they have a couple episodes. They have one, it's called Dolorology, and that features Dr. Rachel Zofniss. And she talks about the biopsychosocial model of pain. And again, some of those basics, some of the things we've talked about. There's a couple of other episodes that are relevant. She has one that she just put out about multiple sclerosis that's really, really good and really applicable to anybody living with a chronic condition. And then this one is for my OTs out there. She has an episode, it's called Salugenology. I'm sure I said that wrong, but it's essentially sort of the importance of hobbies and social prescribing. There's also a book, it's called The Connection Cure by Julia Hotz. And it's this idea that, again, it's very OT adjacent. I was listening to the episode and like screaming in my car, like, this is what I do. Where I'm not just going to say, oh, you should go exercise. I'm going to prescribe you a bike ride. And you're going to go join a club where you do a bike ride with other people once a week. So again, very OT adjacent. And then I had something else. Oh, this might be a controversial tip, but it's good for everybody. We all need to break up with our phone, especially the doom scrolling part of it. When one of those pillars, calming down our nervous system, the scrolling, the use of a phone as a disassociation device rather than a tool is really just ramping up our nervous system, taking it up to like a 12. And so we need to be able to return to using our phone as a tool rather than a distraction. And there is a book called How to Break Up with Your Phone by Catherine Ann Price. And I love it because she gives you a 30-day plan and you can just follow the plan. I have done this myself because I am not immune to the dopamine hits of the cell phone. And I can say that it really has changed how I interact with technology to make it much more intentional because it is part of our life. So those are some of my top hits. And I think, again, for other practitioners and even for people living with pain, done is better than perfect. That is a concept I've really had to embrace in my own chronic illness and chronic pain journey. And starting a business and all of these things is that sometimes it's okay to just get something out there, put it out into the world. It's never going to be perfect. And I think that has been really, really helpful, again, in my own treatment, in working with patients, in working with other business owners, just across, you name it. I think it's a really helpful strategy.
Well, Katy, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for the advice that you bring, the expertise, the perspective on bringing everything together, and where you hope the future will lead your field and the field of medicine in general. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. This has been wonderful.